Good evening, and thank you everyone for tuning in for another episode of The Conversation. I'm your host for the evening, Mr. Roger A. Franco. And the topic of discussion tonight on The Conversation has to do with spirituality and social media. And when we speak about spirituality, we're just not referencing religion or faith per se, but we're also speaking about the way that we all connect as individuals in this age of technology and social media. So here to join us for the discussion tonight, I have Dr. Walter Hidalgo. Thank you, brother, for joining us tonight. I appreciate you.
Happy and humbled to be here, my brother.
So just a little bit about Dr. Hidalgo, to tell you a little bit about his background and some of his credentials. First and foremost, he is a father, a teacher, global citizen, and life coach. He holds a master's degree in church history and sociology from Union Theological Seminary at Columbia University, and he also has a doctorate of ministry from New York Theological Seminary, where his focus was on the intersectionality between hip-hop culture and socio-spiritual movements. And finally, he is the author of critically acclaimed book, Beyond the Four Walls, The Rising Ministry and Spirituality of Hip-Hop. So, for tonight's discussion, as I mentioned, spirituality, just not speaking of faith and religion, but how we all connect in this age of technology. And before we get started, I wanted to start off with a quote that I think sort of frames the discussion a little bit. The quote is from an individual who's known as Deepak Chopra. He is seen as a guru in personal health and well-being. He also combines philosophies of Eastern and Western medicine. So when he was asked what excites him about social media and the impact it can have on spirituality, he stated, "I think that it's the evolution in the way of human consciousness. Social networks are an extension of our minds, and because of that, through social media, there's the ability to influence others' minds." So, Dr. Hidalgo, from your perspective and your background in sociology and spirituality, what would you say is the biggest impact that social media has had on our society?
I think we need to first step back and realize that this experimentation that we know as the internet and social media is still at its infancy stages, and we're trying to figure it out. I tell people that I remember when I was in college in Northeastern doing my undergraduate work, I was at the computer lab, and I had a friend of mine come to me and say, "Hey, can I use your computer?" I said, "Yeah, sure." And I was kind of brown-nosing and telling him, "Yo, what you looking at?" Like kind of behind his shoulder. And he was like, "I'm checking my Facebook." And this was back in like 2003. And now 2019 going on 2020, half the planet, and we know we have about 8 billion people, is now on Facebook alone. Right. So I think when we talk about social media and in the context of the quote, that there's still a lot that we don't understand, but when 2008 happened, around that era, and even going closer to 2012, we saw a shift in the social media realm. Instagram kind of blew up, Twitter kind of blew up, and there was like a lot of content and visuals that were coming at us in a rate that we never experienced before in life. So how to manage that? But when you're dealing with something that's kind of given to the general public and there's no sort of structure, framework, or training behind that, it just becomes like a new frontier, like a new manifest destiny. That's similar to when people came to the U.S., colonized the East, but then expanded westward. So the internet is the new frontier. So I think it's a very interesting thing. There's no two ways of looking at it, but definitely when we're looking at it from a social science perspective, that it's another layer, another dimension that's been added into our world. So how do we quantify that? How do we do qualitative research and integrate these varying methodologies with this new digital world and digital space?
Right. And that actually leads to my next question. In the age of social media, there's, as you mentioned, there's a new way of us interacting and the way we communicate. And a part of that is, folks sitting behind their computer or their phone or tablet or whatnot, and there really is no immediate consequence to behavior. So you could say certain things and, nobody's going to come knocking at your door and beat you up for it, because like I said, you have that, the aspect of sitting behind your computer. So how do you think that type of interaction is impacting sort of quote unquote the real world?
So are you referring to like internet bullying type?
Internet
like
bullies, internet thugs, internet bullies. There's, like I said, there's no immediate consequence to behavior. Prior to this, you would think twice about saying certain things to people because you might get punched in your face. But that dynamic doesn't really exist right now. So how do you think that's impacting, our interactions?
So the first thing that comes to mind when you're posing that question is, I used to teach at a high school in Brooklyn, all girls school, St. Joseph's. Shout out to St. Joseph's. And there was a student. I don't know if y'all remember the incident that happened in Brooklyn where a girl got jumped at a McDonald's.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it went viral.
Yeah, I remember that.
And unfortunately, one of the girls that were there were one of my students.
Okay.
And the ramifications from that resulted in that girl being expelled from the school.
Okay.
And in defense to one of her parents and other people, they said, well, how could that be when they were outside of the parameters of the school?
Right.
And the question was, and what I was thinking too as an educator and as a parent, you represent your circle, and your circle is your school. If you want to do that kind of funny talk and do that kind of stuff, you got to remember that you are associated with something else. So I represent my family, I represent my culture, I represent the people that are refining and molding me. So I don't know if I would have taken that approach, but I guess the reason I say that is because the person that is the third party and recording and not in the actual
altercation.
Yeah, in the altercation is similar to someone that is kind of like affiliated with a crime or something, because you could interject and you can do something about it. But I say that all to say this, because I think that what we're seeing is that because of the other layer added to our world, which is the digital one, anyone can say anything and talk about anyone and not even be a part of it or connected to it. And as a result, the idea of shame, the idea of feeling embarrassed, the idea of feeling like someone is picking on me and bullying becomes exacerbated, because it's not just happening in the physical.
Right.
Now you got other third parties and people that don't even know you involved into something that has no direct connection to you. So the visuals, the media, the content can further like add to someone feeling like depressed or angry, because now you got another layer of people that are adding to that psychological phenomenon.
Right.
So I think the best thing to do with that is, or take into consideration, is the fact that people take advantage of that. And then the flip side to that is also the fact that people use social media, the internet, as a medium upon which how they show themselves to the world. And if you're not getting the same gratification as somebody else, then the whole comparing game starts happening.
Right.
And now they're associating the like button with like a dopamine shot, you know. And for those that, if you don't know what the dopamine is, it's similar to getting a cocaine or an orgasm. It just makes you feel good, right? So it's like now the like button is almost being lined up with that same sort of thought process. You know what I'm saying? So if you're not getting enough likes,
right,
it can drive you angry, depressed, and all the resentment and what have you.
So that's definitely a great point that you bring up, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But you know, someone who is a teacher, and you interact with young people, and obviously nowadays social media and technology is the way of the world. And there have been several instances where young people have, committed suicide based off of something that was, on the internet and whatever. And like you said, it's not just an immediate circle who's exposed to that. It could be hundreds, thousands of people and whatnot. So, what would be the best advice that you would give, as someone who's in the role of a teacher to young people to be able to deal with that type of thing, where something could be posted about you, may be true or may not, but, how to handle that?
I think it's important, like everything else, to have equilibrium in your life, a solid balance with everything that you do. Everything requires reflection and processing. The problem with living in a digital world where everything's happening at a very fast, rapid pace, the internet world doesn't sleep. But we as humans need to sleep. We need to step back. We need to retreat. We need that time to understand and reflect. We have a lot of voices. When you have a lot of things coming at you 24 hours a day, whenever you feel like it, it may have some health kind of downfalls as a result, I think, in that regard. But at the same time, I always tell people the internet has a lot of positivity toward it. So I would suggest that for a young person, look at the pros and cons. So with the pros, understand that if you're going to be in the social media space and platform, use it for good. Use it to connect with people. Use it to connect with family. Use it to start up your business. Use it to, learn about a new culture and connect with someone else, right? But at the same time, the cons, and I would say cons, but also consciousness about it, is understand that whatever you do in the internet world reflects who you are in the physical world. It is an extension of who you are. It's a digital resume of who you are. You know what I'm saying? That's the way people can find you and search you. So be mindful of what you're putting up. So at the same time, allow yourself to step back from the internet and remember that we're working from this realm. And it's important that you utilize the skills that God has given you as a human, and let that create ripples here. And let those ripples also touch on the digital tip as well too. But remember, we're going on this realm too. At some point, somebody, if they're buying something from you because of a site that you got or whatever it is that you're doing, it's a human being interacting with the internet and technology the same way you are. But if there was no human, I mean, there would be no service and there would be no exchange, you know? So be mindful of that. Fast, take time away, step back, reflect, allow yourself that opportunity to reflect, because it's a lot of information, a lot of visuals happening all the time, all day, every day. And it's bad enough that we ourselves are always thinking. You know what I'm saying? So if you add more thought process to an already thinking mind,
it could be overwhelming.
Exactly.
It's overwhelming. With that being said, do you think that it's possible for folks to deepen relationships through the internet?
I do. I think it's possible, because I always tell our young people, like, back in the day, use the mode of transportation, you had to like give it to the horse carrier, right? He was in a horse. It was like that was the mailman. You know what I'm saying? So if you wanted something delivered from New York to Philly, you're talking about a month. You know what I'm saying? On a horse, someone delivering stuff.
Right.
Now, like, you can connect with anybody, anywhere, anytime, you know, and that changes the game. So the production and the expeditiousness of right, like how things move real fast is like really accelerated, both in the physical world as delivery and in the digital, in the sense that now our expectation has risen because the service, the supply and demand is there. You know what I'm saying? So I definitely do see that as something that we have to take into consideration with social media. So given that context, it's like I believe a lot of people have been able to monetize on that, to connect, build bridges on that, interculturally too. You know, I'm always tell myself like the culture I'm part of is hip hop, and that's global. And you see different cultures, different races, different ideologies crossing over as a result of the medium of the internet. And I think that's dope. I think it's dope to see somebody that's 20 years old that's a millionaire because they know how to hustle the game. And I'm just so impressed by that. You know? I'm impressed by people that are just like putting content out there and expressing themselves. I think, you know, I always say that art is your soul revealing itself to the world. So we're seeing people revealing their expressions of themselves, and that's such a beautiful thing.
Right.
It's a beautiful thing to see that. So I look at it like in that format that I take into consideration that at one point the only way we were building is with people in our block, in our hood. Now we have an opportunity for different hoods to come together and to get to know each other. That's dope.
So with that having been said, you know, you bring up the notion of people, you know, showing you who they are based on what they post and what they write. But there's, on the flip side of that, they also only show you what they want you to see. So, you know, as far as, again, the comparisons and us interacting with one another, you know, what's your take on that as far as, you know, people being fraudulent, so to speak, and only showing you one half of, you know, the perspective of who they are?
By fraudulent, you mean like trolling and like...
I mean, because, you know, there's that saying that, you know, believe half of everything that you see. So, for instance, it could be, you know, a dude who has, you know, a nice car, but you see he has a nice car, but you don't see the fact that he doesn't have enough money to put gas in the car. You know what I mean? Or he has a nice car, but he lives in a broken down crib that he can't even barely pay his rent, type of thing. And, you know, I bring that all up because, again, as we've spoken about, people being influenced by what they see on social media and what others post, and then internalizing that and feeling like, oh, I'm not good enough because look at, you know, Tom, Dick, and Harry. And then to the extreme of that, of people, you know, young people in particular, becoming depressed, not feeling that they're worthy enough, and, you know, committing suicide and all that type of stuff. So, you know, from the aspect of, you know, sociology, how, you know, what's your take on it?
I think one of the worst things that we can do to one another is compare ourselves. And from a sociological lens, I say that because what everyone is sharing is one side or one droplet of something much more massive. So what people are sharing is an expression and extension of themselves. And I think that's something that we shouldn't take seriously or literally, but at the same time, it could be used as a space to occupy thought, artistic expression, and possibly even collaborations and coalitions.
Definitely.
But it's the challenging part is filtering and deciphering what's real and what's not, and how to create genuine relationships based on that digital interaction. So being mindful of those dynamics and nuances that consist in a digital platform, we shouldn't take anything seriously unless there's a hand-to-hand interaction or some legality or a lawyer in there that can tell you, yeah, this is official and this is what it is.
Right.
But we should never compare ourselves or look at somebody else's experiences in the digital world as the end-all be-all. We always got to put things into context. We never know what people's stories are to get there. And that flashiness may, for some, appear as a facade, but for others it may be like showing what success can be like and how you can like be motivation. About it. So it resembles a marketing, model and what have you.
I got you.
But again, that goes back into the whole idea of like allowing that space for yourself to step back and reflect on that, and not fall into the okie doke, of the digital stream and that world.
I got you. So we are here with Dr. Walter Hidalgo. We're going to take a little break right now, and we will come back to talk more about spirituality and social media. It's The Conversation. Stay tuned. Thank you, everyone. We are back. The Conversation. Again, tonight's topic of discussion has to do with spirituality and social media. So as I was doing some research in regard to the topic, I came across a study that I thought was pretty interesting. In 2014, psychologists from the University of Virginia wanted to test whether people preferred negative stimulation in the form of electric shock as opposed to no stimulation, being alone with their thoughts. So the study found that 67% of male participants and 25% of female participants opted to give themselves periodic electric shocks during the thinking period. Basically, most people prefer to do something rather than nothing, even if that something is negative. I think it even speaks more to something's wrong with men, because 67% of men prefer to get electric shock as opposed to 25% of women. But that's another story. So, I bring this up because, at times I'm out in public, I'm on the train or I'm in a park or something. And, I specifically look around to see who is not on their phone or in their tablet or whatever. And a majority of the time, 90% of the time, people are just in their phones. So, as we've spoken about previously in regard to spirituality and, sort of being a grounded person, that comes with, self-reflection, being alone with your thoughts and whatnot. So, from a sociological aspect, how do you think that is impacting our society and, the aspect of self-reflection?
Yeah, that's a good question. I find it interesting that now we're seeing a lot of conversations, especially on the political front, of how we're becoming tribal, more like clans-like. People are creating cliques and the internet may play a factor or role in that. And I think that's something we need to take into consideration or listen or hear to. But I think it's not a coincidence sometimes when you consider, I've heard even studies from sociologists that say that about 70% of men are working in some sort of like transportation field. So be it in construction and they're working with the wheels, or it's Ubering, or it's FedEx. We're starting to see also a different way of transporting or providing jobs and providing this sort of opportunity to expand and deliver and provide a supply and demand service. But with the internet, as it relates to spirituality and even social media, I always revert back to this workshop that I do called social Media and Spirituality. And we use the analogy and the metaphors that come out of the movie The Matrix, because it came out in '99.
Right.
And the boom of the internet came not too long afterwards, you know. And I always tell people that Neo was viewed from on a theological lens as a sort of Jesus-like figure.
Right.
Because in the same way Jesus was viewed as half God, half human, Neo was looked at as half human, half robot. And he came to save the world from becoming slaves to the digital robotic self, you know? So in the same way we see us humans enslaving ourselves and doing negative things toward each other, there's a savior for us too, on a human but also on a digital level too. That spiritual force of positivity, of liberation, can also come in a digital form, in the way of Neo. So I say that to say that because it's uncharted waters, like I said before, the internet. So we're looking for something that, because we don't know it fully, we need more training. We need more PD, professional development, in that aspect, so we can better understand it on a monetary level, on a economical level, on a sociological level, on a theological level, because it's just a different world. It's a different sort of understanding that we're really trying to comprehend. And although that's what it looks like from a surface level, another person would argue and say that although it may appear I'm being antisocial, I'm actually communicating with like 30 people at the same time while you're just talking with one person. You understand? And they're able to balance and move and on that playing field. So, you know, we say that the internet and the social media, it's very like faster pace, because remember we went from the horse and now into a sphere. You know, when I was driving, I was with my daughter and I'm doing something I'm not supposed to do. I was texting and driving, you know what I'm saying? But I was, you know, telling someone, oh, I'm almost there or whatever. And she goes, oh, Daddy, that's going to somewhere we don't know. You know, you just text, I don't see it. I was like, yeah, that's right. Like, you don't see the actual words floating into the air. It's just something that we're hoping and anticipating will get conveyed, that message. And I tell her, yeah, that's what we're hoping, right? And it does, and it comes back to us. And that's the same sort of framework of even like with God, right? We hope that if it's out there, that it's going to come back. Even though we are God, so that same Godness is coming back to us too.
Right. Good, great point. You know, just a little bit more information that I came across researching the topic. You know, studies show that on average, millennials check their phones 74 times a day. Each day, 52 million pictures are uploaded to Instagram by 500 million users. As of spring 2016, Facebook averages 1.71 billion users worldwide. 16 million text messages are sent per minute, which equate to 23 billion per day. So, obviously social media plays a big part in how we interact with one another. And it also, impacts our perception of the world based on, who we're interacting with and who we're reaching out to. I also looked into, a lot of people seek validation through the like button, as we've mentioned earlier. And, looking into the science of that, they say the neurological circuitry of our brains may be to blame for our symbiotic relationship with social media. Each time we receive a notification, a like, an email, or something, just as you mentioned, there's a small amount of dopamine that gets released, from the brain. So from the aspect of, spirituality and happiness, I think what we're encountering now in this age of technology is people seeking happiness from outside in as opposed to looking inside to the out. So, what's sort of your perspective on that? And do you think that's something that we can sort of change around or have people look at from a different perspective?
Yeah, I think it's very important to understand that as we grow and evolve, right? Because we're just like Mother Earth. We're evolving, we're changing, we're figuring out. We go through the highs and the lows and et cetera, et cetera. We are in the very rudimentary infant genesis stage of the internet digital world. And when you're first learning to they say you got to learn to crawl before you walk. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important in this case. So I really urge people to take time and do the research, do the knowledge, because from knowledge comes wisdom, and from wisdom comes understanding. And that approach is needed in every aspect, every new thing that comes at us. So I look at it like, because I'm coming at it from I say social, spiritual perspective, because I look at it from as someone that is a believer, and I also look at it from someone that doesn't do this journey, doesn't do this belief alone. Not alone. I got people, I got friends, I got family, and I'm part of a network. I'm part of, a wave, that ocean that we talked about. I'm just a droplet. So I think it's important from a social media and spirituality perspective that when we go into the digital world, like when we hop into, like when Neil was plugged in and he was in there, not to take that too serious and literally, because eventually you got to unplug and get back into reality and go back to the mission at hand. Because part of what I preach about to young people is the fact that they have a purpose in this life. And if you know and feel like you're on a mission, like Neo was, then it adds meaning into your life.
Right.
So one can just easily get caught up in the sauce and try to impress whoever and whatever, but it's really not necessarily has anything to do about impressing anyone. It has really to do with understanding who you are in this world, what you have to offer, and what do you want to leave to the next generation before you go. In the same way that a tweet gets put out or an image gets put out, it's seen and shown, but then it disappears, Nobody remembers that. Right. It's you're the same way, You're gonna be remembered or whatever. So what's your legacy? You know what I'm saying?
Right.
About like when you come through in here, like what are you going to leave with that short time you have in this world? You know what I'm saying? Right, so I think that's the important part of understanding that we don't know what this is, and let me sit on it. And reflection, we talked a lot about reflection. I think it's important to step back, to retreat, fast yourself from the social media as well, because that's not the end all be all.
Right.
You still have to pay the bills. You still have to catch the bus to make it to school on time. You still gotta like amends that negative toxic relationship you got with such and such.
Right,
and the
right.
digital world can care less about that. You understand? So it's very important to have that equilibrium into your life, because it's real like that. It's a part of our lives, but it's not all of our lives.
Great point. Great point. You know, as we've also discussed previously through other conversations that we've had, you know, as I mentioned, in this day and age, the young people are really utilizing social media to their benefit. You know, and I want to touch on some of the positive aspect of that as well, because for a lot of us older folk, you know, we look at them like, oh, you're always on social media and this and that. But, you know, a lot of young people are doing very positive things, you know, with their time on social media. And, you know, we spoke about, you know, as we were talking about, you know, preparing for the show, you know, a 20-year-old who is, you know, becoming a millionaire based off of, you know, what they're doing on social media through YouTube or what have you. So there is a positive aspect to it. Talk a little bit about, you know, that and where you see the future, you know, as far as young people concerned and social media. But, you know, as you said, keeping in mind, knowing that you need to detach sometimes and whatnot.
Let me put it to you like this. Earlier I mentioned to you about 60 to 70% of men work in the transportation business. What happens when all those machines, all of those buses, all those cars are going to be run by AI, are going to become digitized?
Right.
So a lot of people are going to be left with no work. The reality is that we are living in the next revolution, in which is the digital. Prior to that was the industrial. And we've seen remnants of what happens when the industrial closes in places like Detroit, right?
Right.
That can similarly happen in a larger scale on the digital front, when we have machines and we have something else, or people that know how to fully utilize the internet world to monetize and build a brand.
Right.
So the reality is, you know, I listen a lot to the to Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V. I also listen to a lot of people like my brother Steve, who's helped me in my own digital sort of like exploration, and other people that I worked with that I admire and respect, and trying to myself figure out, how do I circumnavigate this digital world? If you do not have a presence in the digital world, you are irrelevant. You are obsolete, because as a millennial and someone that works with post-millennials, if I'm not somehow present in the digital world or doing something related to it, no one can care less. So it's another frontier that allows for you to extend yourself. One of the biggest audience that I spoke in front of in my life was in Lagos, Nigeria. I spoke in front of 50,000 people.
Wow.
Yo, I never seen that many people in my life. I felt like Fidel Castro. I'm speaking like Moses tip. Right. And the way that connection happened was because I went to a conference in Switzerland, and I met a dude from Lagos. He was an attorney, and he connected me with the Council of Youth Ministry in Lagos, Nigeria, and the internet. He invited me to come over. They paid for everything, and it was the first time I ever went to Africa, and it was one of the most humbling experiences of my life, and that wouldn't happen if it wasn't for the internet digital world.
Right.
So I know a lot of people that are taking advantage of it because they know how to utilize the algorithms, utilize paid ads, utilize their team,
Right.
and flow and move it. Like, if you know how to go just as fast as the internet, you're gonna create ripples. So when they say don't run from the wave, be the wave, that changes your mindset. Because so it's very important, in summation, I say, like, the positive or pros of the digital world is the fact that people are creating brands, monetizing, creating networks and relationships that would have never happened in the 1990s, in the era that I grew up, because the only way you knew cats beyond your block was taking the bus or hopping on somebody's whip or the van, you know what I mean, and getting to the places that you need to get to. But now, like, you just click a button and that's it,
Can touch people on the other side of the world. Definitely a unique experience. So, we touched on the topic a little bit of AI, artificial intelligence. And that, definitely is a part of the discussion when we talk about technology and as it advances in our world. But also, which I think is an interesting take on it, is the impact that potentially could have on spirituality. Us as mankind creating artificial intelligence. This, some, speak about a God complex, so to speak. From your perspective, how do you think that, now fits into the discussion of spirituality?
Yo, do we got time for that?
We got time.
About to go. It's deep. It's so deep because, when you even think about it from a Judeo-Christian perspective, because Christians make up about a third of our population, and Jews, although they're a little smaller, but it still has a very heavy impact. The Genesis story of, how God created humanity. And now when you think about X amount of time, centuries and time later, the thought of now humans replicating that sort of like godly like complex by creating something that they themselves is a reflection of them in the same way we are a reflection of the divine is really mind-boggling, so I think it's really I say that because I think it's important that we understand that AI, in the same way with the internet, is still at its infancy stages. I know right now, people that are involved in quantum physics and in different fields, mechanics, engineers, they're experimenting and creating robots. I've done a lot of research in the sense of just understanding that how robots react to picking objects up and how to replicate that over and over, and what sort of emotional sort of like experiences the robot will feel that they can duplicate it. Will they get as angry as we will if we don't pick it up the same way? So it's now it's all experimentation. In the same way Tesla, like a lot of people don't, the car that can drive itself, right? Like, I'm not going to buy that car yet because there's still a lot of bugs in there.
Right.
But at the same time, I'm looking at that movie with Will Smith, I, Robot, and you're like, are these things going to like come back at me? Do I have to sort of control it myself?
Right.
We have all these anxieties, and, we have movies, and, one of my favorite movies is Star Wars, and Star Wars is can't get more deep and real with that, because the reality is when we talk about AI, we're talking about something beyond that. They're colonizing and looking even deeper into colonizing the moon. And how do we create like stations where we can fill up our gas tanks to go to different galaxies, Like, we really gotta stop like when we talk about spirituality, yo, it's not just horizontal. Like the horizontal is the interactions we have with each other.
Right.
But it's always been about the vertical, looking up. And looking up, not just that God is somewhere in these clouds or whatever.
Right.
It's like looking up in the cosmos, the way it moves, the energy shifts, and etc. All that thing is a part of it. And we're tapping into that energy because all the same resources and energies to make that robot, make that AI still comes from the cosmos, and we come from that too. So I always tell people, like, there is no fear. You come from it. If you know who you are, if you love yourself, if you know how to move and operate. And there's some people that already robots out here. They act super robotic. Like you don't need to see metallic in them. You just look at them and you're like, yo, I don't know, my man. Like I don't know, you're already on that robotic level. It's not a surprise. We've seen a lot of proliferation of zombie movies and that people that are physically here but mentally, spiritually are shut down. That's a very real level. Sometimes when the movies can it's the most extreme of the spectrum, but I also believe that on a day-to-day, like some of those extremes, we see it subtly in our day-to-day.
Right.
So I think, definitely we need to kind of consider all those factors in when it comes to this sort of fear of AI. AI is something that's still very infant.
Right.
The scientists and engineers are still trying to figure it out.
Right.
But I think at the end of the day, why are you freaking out about something that we don't know? When you already know who you are, you got to figure out what you know and who you are first. Right. Why are you training about something you don't know? Right. You got to figure out about what you know, and who you know is you. Right. And your relationship with that creator.
Right. Definitely a deep topic that we could go on for many hours. But I just want to take the time to thank you for coming through and engaging with this discussion. Before we get out of here, I know you also have a podcast that you are creating. So talk a little bit about that, the name of it, when people can expect to see it, and some of the topics you're going to touch upon.
Yeah, appreciate that, man. Love, yo.
Of course.
So this podcast that we're rebooting is called Know Thyself. And Know Thyself is sort of a metaphor of the idea of know thyself, which stems back to Kemetic culture and Afro-Indigenous, where the understanding that in order to know yourself, it's something that's from cradle to grave.
Right.
And one of those mediaries that hold those experiences of the self is the shelf. So the shelf is a place where you hold images or memorabilia, or things that sort of freeze time of yourself. So we're inviting guests of all walks of life to share something that comes from their shelves, that we can sort of use as a space to knowing us as a human family and extensions by us sharing what we bring to the shelf.
That's dope. That's dope.
Or
Know
the table.
Thyself. That's dope.
So check that out, coming soon.
Okay. And where can people follow you and basically see the movement?
Yeah, so Instagram, Know Thyself. Same thing on Facebook, Know Thyself. Just put that up too. You can follow me on. I'd be more active on Instagram. So check me at Dr._Walter_Hidalgo.
Okay. Once again, thank you, brother. I appreciate you for coming through and chopping it up with me on this, pretty interesting topic. I think, definitely for season 2 of the conversation, I'll have you come back because there's a whole wealth of information that we could talk about. And I think it's very important, to touch upon those issues and whatnot. So once again, thank you, Dr. Walter Hidalgo, for joining me on the conversation. As always, catch new episodes every Sunday, 8 p.m. Eastern, only on madeforkings.com. Thank you.